Hello, everyone. I'm Danny Thompson from apexanalytix, and I'm joined today with Amy Platis from Northwestern Medicine. And we're here to give you a demo of Northwestern Medicine's supplier portal that they use for onboarding suppliers and driving all of their strategic programs for their existing suppliers and new suppliers as they're coming on board. We had a session earlier today where Amy talked us through the different challenges that people have around supplier onboarding and turning their departments from cost centers into profit centers. And now it's the show portion of our program. Amy, take a second just to introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning, Danny. Yes, I'm Amy Platis. I'm the Program Director of Finance here at Northwestern Medicine. So I'm over the accounts payable department, which includes all of our, travel and expense, our supplier onboarding, supplier relations, the full accounts payable suite, as well as all of our payment programs.
Great. Thanks, Amy. And we've just been really thrilled to work with Amy and her team over at Northwestern Medicine for a few years now, fully automating the supplier onboarding process with this idea that you can get better results, get suppliers more engaged with the supply chain and all of your supplier needs, get faster onboarding, and know your suppliers better. If you tackle everything right from the start as the supplier is onboarding the very first time, just don't even get them onboarded into your operating environment until they've enrolled in all of your strategic programs. And you've also made sure you know who they are and you've applied all of your compliance controls. And so in the case of Northwestern Medicine and the other clients that are using the apexportal software to automate this, we just automate all of that decision making and all of that compliance enforcement and all of that strategic program enrollment into the software, so that by the time a person inside the vendor maintenance team is receiving the information from the supplier, it's all been captured and validated and is complete, so that the relationship can start really smoothly. And the whole process starts out by inviting a supplier to enroll in the portal. And I'm not going to show that portion of the demo. We'll just talk about that briefly, just for the sake of time. So Amy, just talk us through a little bit how a supplier gets invited to register.
Sure. So here at Northwestern, we, through our HR database and single sign-on with the portal, we're able to give access to all of our business owners to invite a supplier that they want to do business with. So the way we've set it up is we have the invitation form, and we ask them some very specific questions about the supplier. So, we know the type of supplier, the nature of business, if there's a contract, if they have access to any of our information systems, any of our patient healthcare information, stuff like that from the business owner. Then what happens is, before that invitation goes out to the supplier, it goes to our procurement manager for review and approval. This is a good way for us to have a single source that's reviewing that data and then making a decision of if this is a supplier that we shouldn't do business with because we already have an exclusivity agreement, or we have a preferred vendor that the end user should use. So they have the ability at that time to direct the end user and give them the information that they need. Or if it's something that we definitely want to use that supplier and add them to the system, it's approved. Once the procurement manager approves that invitation, then that's the first time that the supplier's engaged. They get their link with their login credentials so that they can log in along with a guide. We have like an FAQ sheet and a guide to assist the suppliers through the entire registration process. So it streamlines their questions and concerns as they go through.
Yeah, and so maybe some larger multinational companies might have a procurement person in each region of the world, or maybe they have specific category managers who are that filter on the invitations, just to prevent maverick spend.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the supplier gets an email, you're familiar with the routine. They follow a link, they go into the portal, they change their password, they do a little multi-factor authentication to make sure that they are who they say they are. And then they're presented with this screen. And you can see over on the left, there's just a list of different pages in the supplier enrollment process that are capturing different pieces of information. And it all starts out with a supplier agreement with some terms of agreement for terms and conditions for the supplier to agree to before they even start the enrollment process. And that's what this screen is all about. The supplier just reads through the terms and conditions, they accept them, and then they move on to the next screen. And the next screen provides a checklist of all of the information that they're going to need to register. And so this is just telling them, make sure you have your tax information, banking information, business class information, etc. You're going to need all of that. Then they move on to the first screen where data is actually being captured. And this is the general business information page. So who are you as a supplier? What country are you in? What are your income sources so that the proper controls can be applied to you as a supplier? What's your entity type? Where are you doing business? Just the basics, so you make sure you know who you're doing business with. And just like you expect on every site, the asterisks indicate the required fields. But as you'll see, as this screen is being completed, the options and questions that are being asked farther down the screen may change. And that's because not every supplier is the same, and you don't necessarily need to capture all the same data in the same format for a given supplier. There are also some controls that start being applied on this page as well. So based on the type of supplier and the region, and maybe even your own classification of the supplier, may require the supplier to complete some additional fields. And so right here, in the case of Northwestern Medicine, we're getting to some really specific questions related to something that Northwestern Medicine calls the Business Associate Agreement. Why don't you tell us about that, Amy?
Sure. So as in any industry, there's regulatory requirements that we need to make sure that we're complying with. And so for us, we need to make sure that we are aware of any and all of our suppliers who could possibly access any patient healthcare information, as well as anybody who has any access to any of our HR information, so our PII information, any credit card or banking information, and very importantly, anyone who has access to any of our information systems. So anybody who is putting in any SaaS solution or software solution where they could have access to our system. Those would all be things that obviously now they need to go through a higher level of vetting, make sure that we have a business associates contract on hand, making sure that we have a full IT review, and our Office of General Counsel. So they can do a proper vetting and review of making sure all of the legal documents are in place before we engage in business with the new supplier.
Yeah, and this really points to one of the features of apexportal. It's business rules driven, because the assumption is that every company has their own specific supplier onboarding requirements that are relevant to them as a company and an industry, and may vary by supplier type. And to give you a huge head start, the portal comes pre-built with 180,000 business rules that drive this interaction, but then they're highly configurable to your own specific needs. And here are some of the examples that are specific to Northwestern Medicine. And if I can just move us a little bit farther down, you can see, just move it a little bit forward. One of the things that Northwestern Medicine requires is multiple contacts for the supplier. And so that's one of the unique things of apexportal is we can capture as many contacts as you want, and we can make some required. And in this case, the primary contact is the person who's responsible for communications and managing the account. But Northwestern Medicine also wants to know a cash application contact who's going to be responsible for all of the e-commerce, e-invoicing, and banking type information that might be exchanged on the portal. And so if you go in to edit this particular contact, the system, unlike many solutions, allows multiple users on the supplier side, and the supplier's role can be assigned, the supplier user's role. What will the supplier user be able to do? Manage the cash management, e-invoicing, and maybe complete the registration. But other users may be limited to other specific functions in the solution. Then below that, we get to tax ID, and this is configured to work for every country in the world. Of course, in the US, you enter an EIN or a social security number based on your type of business. And in this case, we've entered all ones, which obviously isn't a valid tax ID. We do real-time validation against the IRS. And you can see right here on the screen, it says tax ID 11111 is invalid. That's because we've done the name and tax ID combination real-time validation against the IRS. But in real business, you know, sometimes this is just going to happen. A tax ID is not always available, or it might be brand new. And so what the solution does for those cases is it knows that the supplier may have a 147C form that they can upload to prove who they are. So the system either requires a validated tax ID or requires the supplier to upload a 147C in the US. Then we get to the addresses, and Northwestern Medicine requires a couple of addresses, a headquarters address and a remit to address, and the system captures all of that, and it even validates and can even auto-correct address information because on the back end we're connected to the post office address books for 250 countries around the world to make sure that address information is valid. And as I mentioned, one of the things that's happening on this screen is around automating PO delivery. So we capture also the PO delivery method. The supplier gets to choose whether they want EDI or email POs. And if they choose an email, then they enter in an email address for the receipt of the POs. And then likewise, they enter in their remit to address. Next is some country-specific information. Here we are capturing the information necessary to create a W-9 for the supplier or to indicate if the supplier is exempt or not. And then we get to this screen that is really the meat of getting suppliers enrolled in strategic programs. And it starts out here with electronic payment methods. So Amy, talk about the different electronic payment methods that you offer and that suppliers get to enroll in.
Sure. So, we use the supplier portal and the registrations Danny mentioned to basically drive supplier adoption to all of our procure to pay initiatives. So that's not just the robust supplier data, it's also making sure that we are completely digitized, end to end. So digitizing the purchase order, digitizing the payment method. The payment method here, one of the things that we did is we eliminated check as a payment option. We don't want to pay anybody by check. It's laborious, it's expensive, it's inefficient, and it's ripe with fraud. Still the number one, most fraud happens around check payments. So what we did is we have multiple payment methods. Several of them are rebate generators. And so in here, we put in our payment methods, we put the benefit of those payment methods. So basically, if the supplier gets to make a decision on what payment method works for their organization, and it impacts their payment terms. So utilizing that negotiation between the value of how fast they get paid and their payment terms to drive that supplier adoption. So we gave them a brief description of each so they understand what the benefits of each program are, and then they can select the program that works for them to make sure that when we issue payment, it's coming to them electronically. We also have here, after they select their payment method, we also highlight the other option they have to control their DSO and their payment terms, which is the ability to accelerate their payments through dynamic discounting. So they have the ability here to select always accelerate. And what that means is as soon as an invoice is ready to pay, it will be paid immediately. And then there's a discounted rate based off of the age of that invoice. So we're making sure we're asking that question early and often. We ask it here. We also have marketing emails. We have multiple places we touch on it. But it's really to try and give our suppliers options, but options that still fall within the organization's goals.
Great.
We also have here now where we get into our e-invoicing solution, which is our next initiative to make sure that all invoices are submitted to us electronically. So we give them the explanation of each of the options. And the great thing is through our partners, we have a digital solution that works regardless of the supplier's IT capabilities or technical solutions. So we have everything from an EDI invoicing through several of our e-commerce partners to an ePDF, which is a digital PDF invoice that can be emailed, and our software scrapes all the data off and feeds it into a similar to an EDI, to a very basic option that allows a very small vendor to do a direct entry. And by direct entering it in through the portal, we ask for those required fields that also then sends it to us in electronic form. So the multiple options based off of their organization, but still ones that meet our goals.
Yeah, and the solution, unlike a lot of supplier onboarding solutions, it's not tied to a specific P2P automation network. So if you have multiple solutions, or if you've got a best-in-class e-invoicing provider, for example, that you want to pair with the apexportal supplier onboarding, we're just happy to connect it up to meet whatever your needs are. All right, so then the system can capture information about insurance, and as it's expiring, send notifications to the supplier and to you to get those insurance certificates updated. There's a place for business certifications, and one of the things we talked about earlier today, Amy mentioned the rise of their focus on trying to drive diversity in the supplier base. And on the business certifications page, there that actually gets taken care of. So you can capture the supplier's diversity status, and this data is validated against the Small Business Administration, and we have incorporated dozens of other data sources to either append or validate diversity status of suppliers, and including the certification agency and the dates of those certifications. So again, if certifications reach their expiration dates, notifications go out automatically to get those certificates updated. And then on the next screen is where documents that are a critical part of supplier onboarding get uploaded or e-signed or generated automatically. And here you can see in the case of Northwestern Medicine, 2 documents are being generated automatically. One is the supplier's W-9 document, based on the questions that were asked earlier, we know whether the supplier requires a W-8 or a W-9 or some other California 590, for example. Those forms can either be generated automatically or updated. And if they're generated, then they can be e-signed right here in the portal. And here's just an example of the W-9 that gets generated automatically, and then can see all of the information taken from the supplier's profile. And then down at the bottom part, that is where the e-signature takes place. So the supplier just clicks 2 boxes and hit submit, and that document is signed automatically. The second document here is an LSR form that Northwestern Medicine uses. Tell us about that, Amy.
Yeah, so depending on the question going through, if it is something where there is an Office of General Counsel or corporate compliance that needs to review their contracts, this is a form that it used to be a manual form that someone would have to fill out and email into our Office of General Counsel. It's a legal service request form. Instead, based off of the information that they are populating within the database, this form is auto-generated so that when it goes for review, it is reviewed by our Office of General Counsel, and they're able to validate this information, and it's stored on the supplier's profile. So if ever there's an adjustment or they need to go back to make sure we have that information, it's all there on the form.
That's great. And then just right under the upload file button, you can see there's a note to the supplier that 2 other documents are required. One is the 147C, which is the backup needed to support that tax ID number that wasn't validated earlier. And so the system requires that before the registration can be submitted, and also a certificate of insurance. And the system just allows those documents to be uploaded and they get added to the list. This can be an unlimited number of forms and whatever you need to get from the supplier before you create their vendor master. So then when the supplier is finished, they hit submit. And then an email goes to the designated approvers for the supplier. And that could be the inviter, it could be a category manager, it could be a vendor maintenance team, it could be a site lead, it could be somebody in compliance and controls. The routing is controlled by any supplier characteristic, any result from any of the many automated validations that happen. So then the approver gets a link. They can go and view the results of all of the validations related to the supplier, and they can view the supplier's profile. Now, you can see one example here is the bank account validation, which passed. But there are also scenarios where the bank account validation may not pass. And if a fraud is being attempted, you may not want to display that error to the supplier. And so here's just a quick example of a bank account that's being changed. Maybe somebody left their computer open and somebody came along and changed the bank account on the supplier's profile. And what happens then is a validation happens automatically. And you can see right here on this page, just a moment. There's a red X that displays for the approver. And then when they go in, they see the results of the validation saying that, hey, there's a mismatch between the supplier's name or name and entity type from what the name and entity type is on the bank account at the bank. So that's the end of our demo. Happy to hear any questions, take any questions for me or for Amy about how this solution works.
So Danny, I don't see any questions. So if anyone has any questions, please, please write them into the chat bot or chat section. One thing I wanted to have you talk about quickly, Danny, is Proxy Registration, which we're now making available. If you can just for companies looking for a supplier portal, some benefit they can get right away versus the deployment.
So we have this concept called Proxy Registration, and it started out as just a way for, maybe there are special use case supplier types. The common one is board of directors that may get a check out of accounts payable. For some companies, it's actors or photographers that are in a special category that they don't expect to use their portal. And so somebody inside the vendor maintenance team can go and complete the supplier's profile for them. Most companies limit that proxy solution to specific sensitive supplier types, and only designated people can go update that profile for those type suppliers. But the good news is, since they're still using the portal, all the required data is captured, all of the validations and compliance controls are applied. Now, a second use case that is developed for this proxy supplier registration process is it takes a while to get all of your business rules configured for everything to work automatically for your suppliers. There's an implementation process that could take, say, 4 to 6 months. And during that time, you can use the proxy supplier registration for any new suppliers that come on board. So while today you might be entering a vendor master directly in an ERP, instead you can use the best-in-class out-of-the-box controls that are in apexportal, including bank account validations and addresses and small business administration validations. Everything like that can be applied automatically while you're just entering a new profile into the portal. And that's just a really quick way from really day one. As soon as you sign a contract, in just a few days, we can have the proxy portal solution set up, and you can get the benefit of all of those controls while the more complex business rules are being configured for you and the portal is being deployed.
So Danny, so we just have a couple minutes. We're just putting up a poll. If you want us to follow up with you for any of these topics, then just click and submit, and we'll do that. One person wrote, "This seems way too easy, wondering how we could screw it up." LOL. So, I think that one thing, Amy, you hit on in the earlier conversation or the earlier presentation was some of the systems that you're connected to. And you walking through this, you don't realize how many different systems you are connected. Could you just give a quick synopsis of all the different systems that Portal is connected to?
Sure. We have multiple APIs going out to multiple systems that we do business with. So of course we have one that is going out to our Verisys CheckMedic, which is going and validating one of our regulatory requirements is that none of the businesses we do business with can be sanctioned by Medicare or Medicaid. So it goes out, it does real-time validation to make sure there's no flags on that. If so, in the approver, just what Danny was showing in that approval thing, a flag would show up saying that there's a violation. So, and a link to that violation for my team to review. It is also, obviously it's tied it to our ERP PeopleSoft. So there's a bi-directional feed from the registration to come into PeopleSoft to create the supplier, but also a feed going back into the portal for the inquiry module and the dynamic discounting module, and for our duplicate audit software. So First Strike that's reviewing to see if we have any duplicate invoices that are in our system and scrubbing that, which is another one of the modules that we have. Then we have our interface to our e-invoicing partners. So when those questions are filled out, it's going out, it's provisioning those emails and those contacts with our e-invoicing partners so that we can have that connectivity for digital invoicing, as well as there is a connectivity to our payment suppliers. So it goes out and they have to do the additional steps with Bank of America or GHX to make sure that their payment method is implemented. So we have multiple, multiple APIs going out and calling into other databases. And that's one of the great things is you can plug and play in those databases and then get results back into the portal so that you can have that as part of your vetting process.
Yeah, so since this is the onboarding process for every supplier has an account in this portal. It becomes the perfect platform to point suppliers wherever you want them, either in the background with an API, or maybe if you just want a link that takes them somewhere else, or you want to send broadcast messages to your suppliers, or just use it as the central hub for your end-to-end source to pay environment. It just provides a platform for that. And I know one thing that you're working on this year is some more risk questionnaires and risk monitoring that you're tying into this process as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of our initiatives for the year is to continue to beef up our risk analysis. So like right now, we're obviously identifying suppliers on the front end where there could be risk exposure, but then we want to get into a continuous monitoring so that if any of our suppliers who have access to any of these things, if they have any data breaches, if they have anything that changes once they've become a supplier, that our IT security would be notified and they can take action on those items, especially if there's access to our databases. If they have a breach, we can shut down that interface, that type of thing, because obviously data security is a huge thing as well. We want to make sure that we are being as diligent as we can with that information.
So we came to the end. Thank you, Amy and Danny. And I think there's a couple more sessions. Take a look at the agenda, but thanks for your time today.
Great. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Have a good day.